What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Inside the Burrow. If you just heard the news, FAU just hired about a week ago John Jakus, Baylor assistant coach for 7 years since 2017, had a stint with Gonzaga as the head of basketball ops, and was at Baylor before that. And what's better to have on the show to talk about him than someone like Cam Stewart, a Baylor insider who basically knows everything there is to know about the Baylor Bears and John Jakus. So we're gonna ask him some questions about Jakus, see how he feels about it, and super excited for it. So Richard, first off, check in with you. How are you doing?
Hey JJ, doing great here. It's great to have a guest on from who covers the Baylor Bears. Cam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It feels like a lot to live up to know everything about the Baylor Bears and John Jakus. But for better or for worse, I've been following him and for this team for a long time. So I appreciate y'all having me on, and I always love to talk about Coach Jakus.
Yeah, well, to be fair, Cam pretty much does know everything there is. He is the co-host of 1660 ESPN, and he is the host of Locked On Bears and a Baylor alum. So you can count on him for this John Jakus info. So Cam, let's just start it off. What do you know about John Jakus, and what are your thoughts about the initial hire?
Well, the word I use for Coach Jakus is always genius. Like, and that's not something I just throw around lightly. I think Scott Drew has done great in his time at Baylor to have, kind of a good balance on the staff of great relationship people, great players, coaches on there, ones that could relate to their players and do well, and also have guys who are just perfect X's and O's types. And John Jakus has a little bit of both. I definitely see him as more of an X's and O's kind of guy, but he's also been out there on the recruiting trail for the Bears for since he came back in 2017 and has brought in some of the best recruits in Baylor's history. So from the FAU standpoint, I mean, this is a slam dunk, I think. I mean, I honestly, guys, I thought he was going to be high up on the board for schools like Oklahoma State and openings like that. And so, I know FAU's had a better run the last couple of years than Oklahoma State has. Don't get me wrong. But when you think about, the prestige of programs, I thought he was going to be in a Big 12 job. And I think FAU right now is pretty close to that with the momentum they got going. So I know that was a big hire from the FAU standpoint of, hey, can we keep this thing going? And I think John Jakus is absolutely the one. I know that a lot of fans, I'm sure, don't love seeing someone with no head coaching experience, but you got to remember, I mean, JJ talked about it at the top. This guy was heading the basketball operations at Gonzaga, a school that is one of the premier programs in the country, and was the number one assistant at one of the other premier programs in the country at Baylor. And I think he's really been a huge part in their rise the last 5 or 6 years to become a top end program that they are. So I think this is a slam dunk hire. I could see John Jakus coaching in the NBA someday. I really could. So I think from that standpoint, it's a heck of a hire for the Owls.
Right, Cam. Well, considering the concern that some people might have when it comes to hiring coaches who don't have head coaching experience, considering how Dusty May worked out for FEU, they can certainly have a lot of optimism about Coach Jakus coming in as a first-year head coach for next season. But yeah, when it comes to his recruiting style, what strategies did Jakus help employ at Baylor to help attract top-tier recruits at the domestic level and the international level? What did you see from him that helped Baylor elevate themselves to that standard of being a national contender?
And I think it's a good point there in terms of the international too, which I'll get into because he has truly recruited all over the world. Now, what's been interesting about this run for Baylor is they were always so great at developing talent. They were always had guys who would stick around 3-4 years and they'd be overlooked coming out of high school or coming out of smaller colleges. And Scott Drew had an eye for talent and his staff had an eye for talent. They could always develop those guys. So you can really break it down into two different chunks. And that is, before the national championship, Jakus, I think, really excels at the guard position, which is something that is obviously blown up big time in college basketball the last 10, 15 years, you could say, where you see these championship teams are playing through their guards mostly. And so he was great at attracting guards. And I look at the pre and to the national championship team, they were 3 loaded guards there: Jared Butler, Davion Mitchell, and Maceo Teague. Jared Butler, they got from Alabama about 2 weeks into school in his freshman year at Alabama. They were able to get him because he wanted out of that program. Davion Mitchell was a backup at Auburn, turned him into a top 10 pick, Jared Butler into an All-American. And Maceo Teague was playing at UNC Wilmington, and he's a starter on a national championship team 2 years later. And their best shooter off the bench on that team, another guy who became an All-American, was Adam Flagler, who came from Presbyterian. So Jakus was able to find these guys, have a true eye for talent, and develop them into All-American style guards. And then after Baylor won the national championship, you could see that prestige starting to rise, and they were able to get some of those 4 or 5 stars in the door. And those were in large part thanks to John Jakus as well. So guys like, Kendall Brown, who ends up, being on an all Big 12 rookie team, leaves as a freshman and is only a second round pick. So that's like, oh, well, did he really do that great that year? Because the other guy was Jeremy Sohan, who was on nobody's radar. He picked him up as a kid who was playing on the Polish national team from England, and he becomes a top 10 pick. And Keontae George is a 5-star guy that they were able to get in the door. Yves Missi and Jacoby Walter, both 4 5-star guys. In fact, Yves Missi was going to be a Texas Longhorn, and Jakus was able to get him through the door here at Baylor. So 2 distinct types of recruiting for him over that time, but both have been very effective, both finding the eye for talent, the overlooked guys, as well as some of the even hyped up prospects that Baylor were still able to win with. So Jakus has been terrific on both of those fronts. And I would say specifically at the guard position, he has really honed his talents there. Baylor had 3 straight years where they had an All-American at guard. That streak ended this year, unfortunately, but 4 All-Americans in a 3-season span at the guard position. That is almost all thanks to John Jakus.
100%. His international recruiting is definitely something, outside of the U.S. that we've seen him do. He was a primary guy, as you mentioned, in the Yves Missi recruitment, who I believe it resided in Cameroon, and in Myro Little, though he did play his senior season in Wichita, Kansas. I do believe he played some of his high school ball in Finland. So two big international guys this year that Jakus really helped get to Baylor. Now, I know this is a bit of a tough question, Cam, but you have referred to John Jakus as the X's and O's genius, the guy who is just a genius at basketball, can come up with any strategy in game situations. And how do you expect this FAU offense and defense to look under Jakus? To dumb that down a little deeper, do you see the defense playing a lot of man, a lot of zone, and is there going to be a lot of sets run on the offensive side of the ball? Like, how do you see the in-game situation looking for FAU next year under Jakus?
Yeah, good question. I think offensively, you're looking at it honestly like an NBA style of offense, which you are seeing a lot more in college basketball. But what I mean by that is, spacing it out, right? 4 interchangeable guys, almost positionless out there, 4 guys who can shoot the rock. And that's not something that Baylor had for years. And in fact, what's so interesting is not only Jakus' first couple seasons there, but also that rise towards the national championship team. That's the things you started seeing different. They were shooting a lot more threes. They were a high volume 3-point shooting team the last 4 or 5 years that thrive on the offensive glass. And you have seen when the numbers have waxed and waned for Baylor, their performances have as well. So when they're getting the offensive rebounds and the kickouts, they're one of the best teams in the country. So you will see some high volume 3-point shooting, and hopefully a couple of guys who can who can handle the ball at the same time. I know that's not always a given in college for guards. Some of them can shoot, but they're not running the point. Baylor's had that problem the last season or two, but in an ideal John Jakus offense, that's what you're seeing. And in terms of defensively, this is what I'm fascinated to see, because Baylor was always a zone team, a hard zone team until about that 2019-2020 season, which is when they made that switch to elite. They had some great guards, and they talked Scott Drew into playing man defense. And the numbers were fairly similar, but they were guarding the perimeter. Overall, the numbers were fairly similar as they were when they were playing zone, but they guarded the perimeter a lot better. They forced teams into worse shots, forced teams out of their offenses more when they played man. So I'll be interested to see that, because this past year specifically, they played a lot of both, and it was really matchup based. So if I had to answer, I'd probably say, at least until Jakus gets his full roster in there, I think you're going to see a lot of both on the defensive end. And I think part of the X's and O's portion of Jakus's game plans are that it is a game plan, not a season plan. So you might see that switched based on your opponent, whether they're running a zone or a man defense. But I would expect, at least in that first season, to see even maybe a little bit more zone than man.
Yeah, definitely. And considering how willing FEU was to shoot the three ball throughout the past couple of years under Coach May, hearing Jakus say that they're going to shoot a lot of threes with him as the head coach, it sounds like a great match. But when it comes to going back to recruiting, FEU is, with this transition going on, there have been some guys who have announced their decommitments from FEU and opening up their recruitment for other schools to give them offers. How was Jakus able to foster relationships with high school coaches, programs at the AAU level and at the international level to help expand Baylor's recruiting reach and identify those players under the radar, and how he can implement that over to FAU?
Yeah, that's a good point, because what I've seen specifically over the last couple of years is Baylor has garnered, not that they ever had a bad reputation here, but they're getting more elite prospects from Texas. And look at the last 2 years in Keontae George and Jacoby Walter. They have been able to develop some great relationships with the high school basketball coaches here in Texas, which is being played at a level higher than it's ever been in this state. And I know, obviously, there's a high level of basketball being played in Florida as well. So he was able to kind of raise their profile within Texas. Not like they weren't getting guys from the state before, but now they were getting the very best recruits. And he is able, I think that's such an important part of his recruiting tactics, is getting in touch with the coaches and garnering relationships with them specifically, because of another thing is the international players. Miro Little did play a year in Kansas. Eve Misi played 2 years here in the U.S. But you got to remember, these international kids, they're a lot of times out there kind of on their own, and they are being entrusting their next life choices mainly to these coaches. And so I think Jakus has done a great job, and all of Baylor's recruiters have done a great job of almost like how you work a parent with the quote unquote typical high school recruit. When he sees an international one, he knows he's got to work the coach and make sure that that he knows the player innately like the coach does, while making that connection. So the good news is kind of what I talked about a little bit earlier, is he's great at recruiting out of high school, but also still has an eye for talent in the college game. So even I've been following up with you guys, all those players hitting the transfer portal. Jakus has a Rolodex, I'm sure, of guys that he can reach out to. And it's worth noting that, it's Baylor has to replace 4 starters, and they have 3 top end 5-star guys coming in. So there maybe isn't the spots available on Baylor's roster that there is at FAU. So there could have been guys that he would have been reaching out to here at Baylor that could well be in an Owls uniform next year. I have no insight on that. No, that's no intel. That's just me looking at the roster spots.
Yeah, Kim. I mean, that would be absolutely great if he could bring over a Baylor Bear over to FAU. That would be awesome. And as you mentioned, FAU has 7 departures this year, 3 seniors in Jalen Gaffney, Brian Greenlee, and Brandon Weatherspoon, and then John L. Davis, Nick Boyd, Giancarlo Sodom, Vlad Golden all entered the portal. So there are 7 guys who have left FAU this year. Is there someone or multiple people that you could see Jakus maybe bringing over to FAU? Just as a guess, like, is there anyone we should keep an eye out on from
In
Baylor?
terms of guys playing at Baylor right now, I don't know that there's one I can put my thumb on. And what's funny is one guy I was thinking about who doesn't play at Baylor now, but I thought would be a great Baylor target that they wouldn't go after was Doug McDaniel from Michigan. But I think about an hour before we got on and recorded this, he committed to Kansas State. So that's a bit of a miss. But there are guards out there that I thought Baylor's in a weird space where I think they should go after a guard, but they also really might not. So I've kind of been keeping a tally of some of those guards that are out there in the transfer portal. Of course, Zeke Mayo, who's like one of the tops, is already gone. He's going to Kansas. But looking at a guy like Darlin Stone Dubar from Hofstra, he's one who is plenty experienced. He's coming in with a year of eligibility. He's more of a wing, but will probably play some guard, who has become a knockdown shooter at Hofstra, started his career at Iowa State. So that's one to look for. And Tyron Lawrence was one that I was also looking at for Baylor. He's plays at Vandy, 1 year left, not much of a shooter, which I know goes against what I was saying about Jakus, but a great defensive player. That's why I was looking at Doug McDaniel as well. Just a great perimeter defensive guy. So in terms of the Baylor guys, I don't know that there's one that sticks out to me of like, oh, he's probably ready to go. He did have a great relationship with Miro Little, and Miro probably won't be a starter next year for the Bears. So maybe to look out for that. But those couple of guys in the portal are ones I was looking at for Baylor because of their play style that Baylor might not have the roster spots for. So a couple of names to keep in mind there if you guys are interested in looking at that portal section of things.
FAU fans, you heard it first. Keep in mind Miro Little only got 8 minutes a game at Baylor, so maybe a little bit unhappy with the situation. You know, that's just a guess. No true insight on that. But watch out, he's not in the portal yet, but could possibly enter soon. Cam, before you go, just one last question. You know, as you've talked about, and we've talked about, you know, John Jakus doesn't really have any head coaching experience, but there's one game last year where he got that head coaching opportunity in the second half versus Iowa State. Baylor was winning, and Iowa State went on a 20-0 run, made it 61-54, and Scott Drew got ejected. He got the technical from the refs, and John Jakus became the head coach for the last 9 minutes of that game. You know, can you just talk about that game, like what you saw from Jakus?
Yeah.
Did he keep everything calm, under control? Was there anything that stood out just from that game?
Yeah, so I'll start with this. There are really 2 games / moments that people will remember John Jakus for here at Baylor. And first, it's giving the scout against Gonzaga in the 2021 championship game. Obviously, the team that he used to work for. They had the perfect game plan for that team that nobody else did all season. They were undefeated, and people thought they couldn't be beaten. So that's like his crowning moment. But the second one is that game against Iowa State back in February. So this game, guys, was bananas. So Baylor was up like 14 at the half. It was the best half that anyone had played against Iowa State, like all season long. And they were still, it wasn't 14, but they were up in the second half, although I guess it was 13 at one point when we'll do the math here. But they were keeping up and playing some of their best basketball of the year. And all of a sudden, Scott Drew gets ejected for being like a step outside of the coach's box. He's trying to talk to another ref, and Jeb Hartness comes across the way, double tees him, throws him out of the game. The place was in shock. Scott Drew has 1 career ejection in 21 years. That was it. And so like the building was up in arms, and it became a complete ref show. So Iowa State goes on a 20-0 run, and 12 of those points come from the free throw line, mainly coming from that double tech, and then Baylor's bench got a tech along with it. And the arena was hostile. I think it's the closest I've ever seen to Baylor fans like littering the court. Like it was really, really bad. And I use about once every couple of years is when I say this officiating would have lost a team a game or lost a team a game. And that would have been it. Like it was terrible. Our AD got fined for complaining about the refs after the game, for calling it unacceptable. Anyway, all that to set the scene for you, that it was just a crazy environment in there. And like you said, Iowa State goes on this big run, and a lot of teams, you're done. That's it. One of the top 5 teams in the country just went on a 20-0 run in the second half. Your head's gone. Your head coach is gone. So college kids, their minds are going a ton of different ways. And Jakus was able to level it out. They did fall behind by 7, but he was able to say, guys, we're very much in this game. Let's not completely lose our heads here. I know we did for a couple minutes. I know the fans are, but we can still win this game. And he was brilliant down the stretch. I think one of the main things was, which you won't see in the box score, but Ray J. Dennis was Baylor's pretty much their only point guard last year. No one else could really run the offense. And he got his 4th foul with a couple minutes left in the game. And you see coaches do this in about the last minute. John Jakus did it for about the last 2.5 minutes, where anytime he was getting a whistle, he was offense, defense, subbing for his point guard. And weirdly enough, he actually couldn't get Ray J. Dennis onto the court for the last offensive possession. But the defensive guy, Jaden Nunn, was who got the game-winning basket. So he was able to keep the team with a level head, and Scott Drew could not say enough great things about Jakus and his performance after that game, about keeping the team in line and getting them over a finish line when they had every excuse to not get there and beat such a good team. But credit to Jakus there. That was his head coaching moment.
And he definitely succeeded in that. Cam, thank you so much for joining the show. Up next on Inside the Burrow, you'll hear some baseball talk after FAU shuts out Miami 3-0. Cam, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for your time,
guys.
Cam.
Thank you guys very much. Take care, Coach Jakus.
Yep. Pleasure to have you on today. Yep. All right. See ya.
Welcome back to Inside the Burrow. Richard Pereira, as you saw in the interview, was there asking some phenomenal questions about recruiting. Just so good, and so good to have Cam on. Great answers there, One of the most knowledgeable Baylor basketball insiders, Baylor basketball fans. But we have a new guy here. You've seen him before. He's on and off on the pod. Robbie Listella, the GOAT himself. He knows everything there is to know about FAU baseball, FAU basketball. He goes to FAU right now. And, Robbie, introduce yourself. How's it going?
JJ, I think you hit all the nails on the head. I appreciate it, bud. I'm happy to be here, and let's break down some FAU baseball and touch on some hoops a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll go to you again. I mean, what an impressive shutout last night. 3-0 against a very good Miami team. Taking them 2-0 in the series, as FAU also won the first one. FAU has won 3 of the last 4 and destroyed the dirty Memphis Tigers, who won game 1, and then FAU came back with 2 impressive 7-run wins and 11-run wins. But after that 3-0 versus Miami, can you recap the game? The bullpen was super good, and the pitching was very good as well.
I think in that game, what sealed the deal for me against Miami is having good pitching like that could shut down their bats, and has it been all year for FAU. Trahey actually came in and shut the door and closed the game for FAU last night, but then you get a guy like Andrews to come in and take his the role that Trahey's been good at, the right after the starter role, the 6th, 7th inning role. 2 innings again, FAU there, they shut the door. Those are 2 innings where FAU really hasn't been hurt at all this season. And it's really been amazing to see the bullpen do the work that they do, and against a team like Miami, who, it's a rebuild year for them a little bit, but still, it's an AACC team, and to shut them out is real solid. The back, Christian Adams got going as well, so he kept it rolling. He didn't get going.
Yeah, I got to concur with Robbie here. A very balanced win on both sides for FAU baseball. Getting the hits they needed to get the runs on the board, and having excellent pitching from Brandon Smith, Steven Andrews, Drumheller, and then topping it off with Danny Trahey for the final inning just to complete their shutout, which is their 3rd ever shutout in program history against the Hurricanes. Their first since 2021, which also ended in a 3-0 score. So their FEU has a 2-0 lead on Miami this year. They are if should they win another one, the next game against Miami, they will be the first series win against Miami since 2018, where FEU swept Miami that year. So hopefully they can keep the winning going. And after winning 2-3 against Memphis before this Miami game, they now move on to East Carolina, ranked 12th in the country according to D1 Baseball, with a 21-6 record, 4-2 in conference play, and they're currently riding a 5-game winning streak. Very big series, especially since it's at home.
Piggybacking off what Richard said, FAU, they play number 12 East Carolina starting on Friday, 3-game series here. This is a really solid baseball team that made the NCAA tournament last year off an at-large bid. Didn't even win the American Conference, which Tulane won. Very respected baseball team. Started the season in the top 10 in baseball, just like FAU did for basketball. They were around that 10 to 12 range all year, and they are hot right now, playing really good baseball. Robbie and Richard, what do you expect from this series? Give us some predictions of the series, and then we'll transition into basketball.
For me, it's going to come down to whether FAU's pitching can slow down those bats of ECU. That's the bats is what's taken them so far, and I don't see a reason why FAU's pitching will struggle. But you never know against a team like ECU. They've got a lot of bats. I want to see the starters get past the 5th inning. Give them a little bit of depth and maybe push Trahey back into that closing role. Don't have to bring him in the 6th inning. Get some depth out of the starters. Don't have to go to the bullpen so early. I think that's going to be key to try to stay in it versus a very talented ECU team. But I can see FAU easily pulling 2 games if the pitching holds up. What about you, Richard?
Yeah, like East Carolina, one thing that stands out to me is their bullpen. Like their opponents are batting .213 against East Carolina's pitchers, which is going to be a very tough challenge for FEU, who has their moments, but has been trying their hardest to like improve their batting average. When you look at it, it's .266, not as bad as the opponents who have won against East Carolina, but when you consider the fact that only 2 of their batters are hitting 300 or higher, it's going to be a very interesting task. It's going to be a tall task for FEU to like have their best outings in the hitting department, and like being careful about Carter Cunningham, who is batting over 400 with 7 homers and 32 RBI, 43 hits, most on the team. Limiting his production when he steps up to bat is going to play a key role in how the Owls do against East Carolina at home for this upcoming weekend.
Definitely will be a huge series for FAU. This will be the second highest, ranked team that they will play the rest of the season, with the matchup versus Florida on April 30th, who I believe is ranked number 5 according to D1 baseball rankings. Now, FAU basketball, the main vocal point, the main news that's being talked around this Boca Raton area. 7 guys have left. Now, 3 guys are 100% done in Jalen Gaffney, Brandon Weatherspoon, Brian Greenlee, and we knew that from the start of the season as they were all seniors. 4 guys have entered the portal, with Nick Boyd, Giancarlo Rosado, and Vlad Golden, with the biggest loss being guard John L. Davis. Now, Vlad Golden has entered the draft. John L. Davis has entered the draft and the portal, which is a bit confusing. And then Nick and G both just entered the portal, not the draft too. Robbie, what's your initial reaction? FAU is losing 4 of their key contributors. How are you feeling?
Well, it stings a little bit, but at the end of the day, FAU was really fortunate just to be able to get them to return for 1 year in today's crazy college basketball landscape. And now you see with guys like Nick and G, those guys did not go in the portal last year. G's got 1 year eligibility. Nick's got 2. If they don't at least see what's out there, they're doing themselves a disservice. They've made it clear, which they didn't have to, that FAU is under their consideration to come back. You see players enter the portal all the time and say, goodbye, guys. Thanks for having me. Don't mention the school again. They made it clear that coming back is under consideration. With those two guys, that you have to they have some value out there. It's possible. And then you look at Vlad and John L. The iron is red hot with both of their names right now. It's the same thing. They need to go get evaluated, and if they get evaluated and a scout goes, "Hey, we want to draft you in," even if it's the second round, who knows? Maybe Vlad takes that, gets a contract, and runs with it. You never know. So they have to at least try. And I'm rooting for them. But hopefully FAU can make some plays, get some NIL funding, whatever it is, so that when Nick and G are ready to make their decisions, and Vlad and John L are ready to make their decisions, FAU can say, "Hey, if you guys want to come back, we've got this for you right here."
Yeah, and definitely, if Vlad and John L don't get drafted, Vlad already said that he, with reconsideration of coming to FAU, if I don't forego with the draft, because they have to decide by April 27th, which is they still have some time, and the portal closes on April 30th. So if these two guys really are close with their decision and they decide not to come back, which the decision will be made on April 27th, they're going to have to move really quickly to see what schools are going to want them if they do enter the portal, because the portal will close on April 30th. You have to know where you're going by that time. So I could very much see both Vlad and John L coming back, and to even see that Nick and G are even considering FAU is amazing. So very true what Robbie said there. Richard, I want to go to you here. As we talked with Cam Stewart, he said, some guys we could look out for. The guy from Oral Roberts, Doug McDaniel from Michigan, and Miro Little from Baylor. Is even if FAU gets those players, I know the fans are wondering, what do you expect FAU to be under Jakus? Because I don't think it's going to be the same with Final Four after NCAA tournament appearance being both single-digit seeds 2 years in a row. Do you expect the same FAU we've seen the last 6 years, having winning season after winning season, 2 NCAA tournament appearances as a single-digit seed? Is that your expectation under Jakus, even if he is to bring in a few transfers without John L. Davis, Vlad Golden?
Well, to put it simply, no. Simply put, year one is going to be a transition year for FEU from moving on from Coach Dusty May to Coach John Jakus. That much is a given. You might see similarities with how they coach, with the European style in mind for both of them, especially with the relying on moving the ball at all times and having the 3-ball play to their advantage, which of course Jakus did say that they will shoot a lot of threes during his introductory presser and play hard defense. So it's pretty clear that Jakus's mind is in the right place when it comes to elevating FEU to that standard of remaining a winning program, being seen as a winning program across the country. Of them being national contenders, I do not see that. But the expectation for me is to gather a solid roster, have great players who can score at will, with a great supporting cast who know their roles, who are willing to do them in the best way possible, who can play defense at all times, just be attentive to everything that he's saying, and just be united as one. Have the chemistry, bond together throughout the ups and downs, and you'll see a great Owl squad heading into the 2024-25 season. Whether it's competing for the regular season title in the American or going deep in the postseason, the sky's the limit when it comes to the potential of FU under Coach Jakus.
Speaking of something that you just said, Jakus did say in his introductory press conference, no one in the country is going to play harder than us on defense. So, yeah, that's something that will change. Elijah Martin, our third leading scorer, hasn't entered the portal. I've heard so many people say it's coming today. It's coming today. Why would he stay and everyone else that got a lot of playing time leave? He'll either enter the portal or draft is what they're saying. Still, we haven't lost him yet, so we can't expect anything else. But Robbie, there's some guys who weren't featured like key in the offense, but still got some minutes. Like Trey Carroll, who was injured at the end, but still was featured well, had a good year. And Brennan Lorient, someone else who's a big, who is super athletic. We've seen him shoot some shots from mid-range. Sometimes even though that's not his key, he likes getting inside, throwing the ball off the glass. And even like Isaiah Gaines, we saw minutes from him. Like, do you think those guys are going to be able to step up? Because clearly they're not in the portal. Can you just talk about them? Because that's the future of FAU, and especially with Ty Robinson, Elijah Elliott, and Lorenzo. I forget his last name, but all entering the portal. They're all decommitted from FAU. We're going to have to look at some of these younger guys to step up, as well as a lot of our starters transferring. So, how do you think those guys who we saw play a little bit, even maybe you could talk about a Jakel or a Devin who redshirted, Alejandro and Jack returned, Leo Beath, who we saw a little bit. Talk about this roster, Robbie, real quick.
It's pretty deep. These are all. Dusty's not bringing these guys and leaving them on the team if they can't play. They may not all have scholarships. You look at guys like Leo or lots on scholarship now, but Jack Johnson, those guys don't. But they're here for a reason, so they can each provide something. But when you talk about guys like Trey Carroll and Brendan Lorient, those are guys that I really see if they stick it out, I think they're going to really contribute. I talked to Trey right before the NCAA tournament game, and he said. He was telling me he's out for the rest of the year, but I was asking him about this season, and he was talking about starting with a smile on his face. So he obviously has aspirations of making an impact here at FAU, and I definitely think he's more than capable of doing that. Same thing with Lorient. He's developed so much in the 2 years that he's been here. Give him a Jakus offseason where he's got the idea in his head where he can be the focal point of an offense. He's going to be really dangerous for other teams. I mean, he's very physical. He can do a lot, dribble the ball. He can shoot. He can play down low. He's a defensive pest. So it's just, he's a guy that really I want to see take on a bigger role this season and continue to develop. And I think they are capable. I think they're all capable. But do I think that all of them maybe will play? No. I think Jakus is going to bring in a lot of his guys, but there will be room for anyone that wants to at least try to contribute. I think there'll be room, and I think they can.
I agree, and everything you said there is factual. It's true. That's going to wrap up the show. I hope you guys learned something about Jakus. Baseball is doing really well right now, and some guys that FAU is going to be looking at. So, Richard, Robbie, thank you guys so much for joining. And make sure you hit that subscribe button of the FAU Owls Nest YouTube. This is Inside the Burrow. You can check all our written work at FAUOwlsNest.com. Richard Pereira, Jim in Florida, and Robbie Estella being the primary writers on that over there. So, thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a comment what you think. If you have a question, feel free. And see you in the next one. Go Owls.
Yep. Go Owls.